Sorry, there's always a weird delay between clicking the button and when it actually goes live. So I'm always like, is it on? Is it on? Is it on? So, yes, today we are reading from A Weapon of Magical Destruction again. So gather around for story time. I am Katie Salidas, and this is book 1 in the Agents of A.S.S.E.T series. Now, for those of you who were with us last week, you remember that we left off at chapter 2, where Sage had a really, really interesting dream, nightmare, vision, all of the above. And she was just waking up as we finished our session last time. And we're coming into chapter 3 now, and we'll find out a little bit more. So if you have your books, grab them out and let's read along. If not, just read along with me or listen to me read along. And let's see, where did we start? Chapter 3. Where are you? Chapter 3. I always lose my page. You'd think I would have bookmarks. Nope, never have a bookmark on hand when I need it. All right, so as this is a live reading, if you do post a comment, which I do welcome all comments, I won't be able to see it while I'm reading, but I will get to them afterwards. And I do thank everyone so much for listening in, for joining in. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys like it too. So let's get started. All right, chapter 3. And remember, there will be author fails, so please laugh along with me as I trip over my words. Chapter 3. It's okay. I'm here, Mark said gently. He knelt down and met her eyes, scrutinizing her as if she'd had some kind of seizure. She'd been dreaming, hopefully not talking in her sleep, though if she had, that would explain the concerned look on Mark's face. Headache. I need water, please. She breathed deeply, struggling to separate the dream from reality. Her wrist itched, echoing the pain that had branded her. She reached to scratch it, noticing how closely Mark watched her hands. His lips twitched, and the beginnings of a smile began to split his mouth, but he clenched his jaw and stood quickly. With his back to her, Mark promised to return with medicine and water. Twice now he'd left her alone in this room, but she wouldn't let herself fall asleep this time. She looked down at her wrist, which itched like a healing wound. The mangled veins appeared less haphazard now, taking on more of a tree-like appearance, just like the dream. But now she noticed something else. A freckle? Maybe. Sunspot, that was probably the proper term. A quarter of an inch above her birthmark, a small speck had appeared. Shaped like an elongated heart, it looked like a leaf at the top of her tree-like branches. Her mother had had spots surrounding her birthmark as well. Maybe that was why Mark had seemed so interested. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm like tripping over my own words already. We should make a drinking game out of this. Reality was catching up to her. She was becoming like her mother, at least as far as the deformity was concerned. Mark returned quickly this time, carrying bottles and a stack of papers so high that her hand cramped at the thought of having to sign them all. After you're done signing these, let's grab some dinner. He sounded as if he were delivering an edict, but food was the last thing she could think of. Really, I just want to get this over with and go home to Vegas. She clarified the destination, knowing that at some point he'd probably ask if she were going to come back and live at her mother's old home. He sighed with obvious disappointment and took out a handkerchief to mop up the sweat on his brow. She'd never noticed before that he wore a large watch on his left arm. The band, more a cuff of leather than a traditional strap. Branded into the leather was the tree, not a mangled, misshapen mess like her deformity. This one looked like an old Irish knot, with a canopy above and small root system below. A sigil of a great house, or maybe part of a clansman's crest, she wondered. But those things belonged to her Thursday night game night group. Not in the real world. Though it hadn't escaped her that the symbol was very similar to the markings both she and her mother shared. Perhaps it was his way of paying homage to her family. I'll leave you to it then. He caught her curious gaze and pulled his arm behind his back as he slowly retreated from the room. If you need anything, you know where to find me. As weird as she was feeling, Mark was acting even more so. The way he kept looking suspiciously at her birthmark couldn't be ignored. He'd known her since she was a child. She hadn't changed, but the way he looked at her certainly had. She'd have to get to the bottom of that mystery later. The mountain of papers Mark had left for her would take hours to work through. She set herself to reading and signing the documents that she barely understood. Legalese was a language that she didn't speak fluently. By the time she'd made it to the end of the stack, she stopped trying to make sense of everything and just scrawled her name where the little sign here sticker had been placed and moved on. The sun had long since departed, and her stomach growled fiercely with the need for food. Mark returned to clear away the final papers, looking as if he'd spent the day battling wargs and ogres. He collapsed heavily into the seat next to her. Please, at least let me feed you before you disappear again. The defeated tone in his voice, coupled with the heavy bags weighing down his eyes, said that he needed company a little more than she did. How could she refuse? I've got an early flight out tomorrow, so let's make it a quick dinner. As she said the words, Sage saw the light return to his eyes. But knowing where the conversation was going to go, she finished off with, I still haven't been by the house yet, so I can't be tied up all night. How about this? Mark stood and held a hand out to her. Pick your favorite takeout and we'll bring it to the house to eat. She noticed it again. The strange watch that he was wearing with the intricate tree branches branded into the leather. It was just the kind of thing that she would wear to cover up her deformity. It was still a strange choice for him to wear, though. I could definitely go for some chopsticks, he said, keeping the conversation going as her eyes lingered on his leather cuff. Might be the last time I ever get to have their house chicken. She hadn't yet taken his offered hand, but before she could, Mark pulled it back. Your wish is my command. Let me just grab my briefcase. He rushed from the room quickly, as if desperate to escape. Scurrying off seemed to be the theme of the day. Then again, she wasn't herself either. Wrestling with feelings of depression over the loss of her mother had made her want to run screaming from the building with every reminder of the woman. She would never see her again. She'd taken for granted the notion that Mom was a fixture in her life, her personal superhero. She might have moved away and begun her own path, but the anchor of home and family had given her security. That was over now. Each moment amplified the emptiness of being truly on her own. Through the glass-paned walls of the conference room, Sage watched the comings and goings in the main lobby. 24-hour operation ran on layered shifts, and employees were wandering in and out of the front door and attached offices. Some of the people looked fresh-faced, as if they were headed for the elevator banks, ready to leave, while others dragged their feet heading towards the exits. She welcomed the monotony that she'd be returning to when she got home. Idleness made anguish all that much more unbearable. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a child walking alone from the elevator banks behind the reception desk. At first she thought he might be wearing an elaborate costume. Large brown ears protruded from the side of his head, and a green nose jutted out sharply like the beak of a bird. His little goblin face, pocked by warts and moles, had dark, wiry hairs sticking out in patches around his cheeks and chin. These were details that she didn't normally see on store-bought kids' costumes. This was kind of a strange thing that would definitely win a costume contest at a comic convention or fantasy festival. What was the kid doing wandering around alone in the lobby? And why the elaborate disguise? It was far too early for Halloween. Sage did a double take, blinking away the weariness from her eyes. On second glance, the child had gone, and in his place stood a man shorter in stature than most, but definitely not a child. A green baseball cap sat on top of his head, and balanced on his shoulders was a long poster tube. She blinked again and tried to shake away the fog of exhaustion as she gave the man one last look. Yep, normal skin, normal guy. A mind fed by weekly role-playing games and a steady stream of sci-fi fandom had given her imagination that could easily conjure up goblins, a dangerous combination when coupled with the mental strain and lack of good sleep. See, there we go, tripping over my tongue again. Sage did allow herself a moment to laugh, imagining goblin kids wandering the hallways at A.S.E.T. Mark returned looking much more at ease than when he'd left. Sorry, last-minute schedule change. Got a whole new batch of recruits and, well, no, you don't need the details. Let's go. He arrived a few minutes later. If he'd arrived a few minutes later, she'd have formulated an excuse to leave. But seeing the renewed eagerness in his smile, there would be no escaping dinner. She followed him out to the car. I'll have my boys send your boxes out tomorrow. Delivery to your apartment in Vegas, right? He asked as he unlocked the old green Jeep Wrangler. Still have the beast, she smiled. She smiled at the caked-on mud. hanging by the tires and the thin layer of dust coating the body. With a quick swipe of her fingers, she wrote, "Wash me," on a rear panel and giggled at her private joke as she climbed into the passenger seat. As far back as she could remember, the beast had always been covered in some form of desert, and if Mark had dared to try and wash her, the haboob would blow through and cake the Jeep in a fresh layer of mud and dust. "Never getting rid of this beauty," Mark patted the side of his beloved car. Most high-level executives drove luxury vehicles, but Mark had only ever driven this Jeep, as far as she knew. Being in it again brought back fond memories of learning to drive out in the desert. Nothing like having a roll cage and being set high above everyone else to give you a sense of security when you're a newbie at the wheel, especially when off-roading. The sweet memories lightened her mood, and she strapped in and patted the car door lovingly. "You want to drive?" Mark asked. Sage shook her head. "Nah, just enjoy the ride." "Nostalgia," he chuckled. "A bit, yeah. There's some good memories here. Speaking of, you didn't answer. Do you want those boxes shipped to Vegas?" He had to sour the moment with reality, didn't he? She grimaced but kept her voice neutral. "Might as well put them in storage. I'm not ready to look inside." He must have sensed the sudden drop in mood. "Of course! We have a storage unit for all the things you just want to leave behind." His tone sounded like it was an attempt at being supportive, but he failed to invoke the sufficient enthusiasm, as if he were unsure of exactly how he should proceed. It was clear to Sage that he wanted her to have some reason to come back, and she dreaded the next step in that conversation, knowing that it was coming. "Thanks," she sighed. "And if you ever want to move back," there it was. The offer to stay, the offer to work with him would follow, and the answer was no. But saying it so bluntly felt as if it would be like smacking him in the face for all he'd done for her and her family. And he was still doing things for her to help get her through this rough period. "I'm not selling Mom's home, but I can't consider moving back right now. The pain is just too raw." Mark nodded, pulling his face into a forced smile. "I think of you like a daughter, right?" She tried to mimic the pleasantly neutral expression, but she was far less experienced at wearing the mask. "I take it as my personal duty to ensure that you're safe and protected," he said. "I know you do, and I appreciate that." Trapped in the car now, there was no way for her to escape this conversation. She turned her head away, looking towards the parking lot for anything to distract her or reason to change the subject. "So, should you ever consider it? I have a job waiting for you here at A.S.S.E.T. Mark started up the old Jeep, and she roared to life like a monster ready for the kill. "I'll say no more, okay?" Sage spotted the space where Mom had always parked. She hadn't been gone long, but already her name had been wiped from the curb. So many times Sage had been here over the years, so many memories, soured now by the emptiness of her loss. A flash of light caught her attention. A group of agents wearing their black uniforms was walking towards the back entrance of the building. Between them, a wild man in restraints thrashed about, speaking in a language she had never heard before. Flashes of blue light arced out from his hands, as if he were conjuring bolts of lightning from thin air. But none of the men holding him seemed to notice or care. Even when those streams of light struck their bodies, they didn't as much as flinch. "What the heck is that?" she asked, wondering if her mind was playing tricks on her again, as it had earlier in the lobby. Looks like the boys are bringing in someone for interrogation," Mark replied casually. Business as usual." Did you see the zaps?" she asked. It was like she couldn't finish the sentence without feeling silly. Mark turned to her, his eyes saying yes, but the words when they came out of his mouth were the opposite of that thought. "Streetlights reflecting off the handcuffs, probably?" That didn't look like streetlights reflecting off of anything. It was... She wanted to say magic, but the words, it stuck in her throat. "Like what?" Mark asked, hanging on her response with more interest than he'd had in the conversation all day. "Magic? I guess." She feigned disbelief with a shrug, for lack of a better word. Thank goodness he'd said it, not her. Or maybe a taser gun. If it was a taser, somebody would be on the floor twitching, Mark joked, and then put the car into gear. The alternative sounded just as laughable. Magic? Maybe in the dream she had when she'd visited that land during her nap. She'd seen some very interesting uses of magic there, but this was the real world, where magic didn't exist. She looked again, but the group had already disappeared into the building. That was no reflection, nor had it been a taser. She wasn't buying Mark's casual dismissal of it. He was the director of operations, the kind of guy who knew everything that was going on at A.S.S.E.T. If she had to venture a guess, A.S.S.E.T had some pretty neat weaponry that the general public had not yet seen. Maybe something so unique and powerful that it had rival companies trying to get their hands on it. And that made her wonder if her mother had been caught up in more than just a simple plane crash. Maybe that was why Mark was acting so weird and talking about her protection. Was he guilty of causing Miranda's death in some way? You sure I can't convince you to come to work for me? Mark broke the silence with another attempt to make her stay. The answer was no. But Sage couldn't bring herself to say the words aloud, especially when her mind was still analyzing the possibilities of what might be going on there. The job offer will be on the table for as long as I'm head of operations here, he assured her. When you're ready, I'll just leave it at that. All right, so we are at the end of chapter 3. Next week, we will continue on with chapter 4. And I see that there's been some comments while I was reading, so I want to give a shout out to my wonderful viewers here. Belinda, thanks for visiting. Regine, Rebecca, you guys, I love you so much. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And for those of you who have the book, did you read along with me or are you just listening along? Will the series be in audio? Yes and no. Not as of yet, but I do want to get the series in audio, but because it's a longer series, it's going to take me a little bit to find the right way to put it into audio. I would really, really want to give this series a great producer to do it and to find a what do they like to call themselves? They don't like to call themselves, dang it, the word is at the tip of my tongue and I can't think about it. Narrators. They don't like to call themselves narrators. There's another word for it. And I'm sure somebody in the comments section will probably find or say it before I do. But anyways, I want to find somebody who can get the voices just right and who is willing to go the whole way with me, because I don't want to change between books. I don't want to like do book 1 with one narrator and then do book 2 with a different, because it changes the whole feel of it if you don't have somebody who's willing to do it all the way through. So it's going to be a while before that one goes into an actual audiobook. Hello, Regine. You are a viewer. Thank you for viewing. I hope you enjoy it. Just listening and taking shots while you stumble. Yes, make it a drinking game, because I have a very bad habit of always tripping over my words. So thanks for laughing along and making it fun. Rebecca, you want to go the whole way with me? All right. We'll see what we can make happen there. Thank you again, guys, for watching. And I'm going to try and make this my regular thing for Sunday. So if you enjoyed it, share it, let people know, and let's get a really good story time going for Sundays. And until then, I will see you guys next week. Have a great rest of your weekend. Hope your next week is wonderful. And we'll talk to you later.